Welcome to today's episode of Backstage with Randy Phillips. My name is Randy Phillips, and I'm your host on a personal journey. And you'll see backstage how I wrote my brand new song, Heaven's Rose. But before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching from, and give us a 5-star rating or a great review. If you find this content valuable, if it touches your heart, help others hear about us. I can't wait to take you backstage for my new song, Heaven's Rose. You'll hear how I wrote the song, how one simple question can change a person's life, and the writing process. What is that like? How do you write a song with the co-writer? Well, you're going to learn that and much more. This story is so dear to me, and I'm grateful you're here to experience it today. Donnie Moore, such a righteous man, so fervent for God. He had a transformation story, and he wanted to share it with everybody. He was such a bold proclaimer of Jesus Christ. He was a straight-up evangelist. I wish I was a little more like him and a little less like me. He came to my church, and he told me a story. He said that he was on a campus doing some campus ministry. He would just go out into the public square. He would just start preaching the gospel. Had a little PA system. He was so bold. He said on this particular day, this was a campus that was super anti-Christian. A group of hecklers joined themselves to shut him down. And the more he proclaimed Jesus, the louder they shouted, bullhorns, hollering, throwing things. Somebody went over and unplugged his PA system. But he was undeterred, Donnie Moore. The ringleader of the heckling group was a journalist at the university, and she actually was in charge of the paper, the student paper. So later she came to him and said, Donnie, I'm so interested in your story. I want to write a story on you. Well, she didn't want to write a flattering story on him. She wanted to embarrass him. And so, but he agreed. He sat down with her over coffee, and she said, tell me your story. He began to tell her what his life was like, and then how he believed on Jesus, and Jesus radically changed his life. And she listened. And he said to her, do you believe in God? She said, absolutely not. How could I? And he said, well, tell me about that God that you don't believe in. She said, he's cruel. He's supposed to be all-powerful, and he allows suffering, children to be hurt, people to be abused, people to be murdered. And then she paused and she said, and what he allowed to happen to me. And Donnie said, well, I can understand how you'd feel like that. That's not the God I serve. The God I serve is kind and loving and compassionate and interested in everyone. She listened to that, and then she asked him a question he had never heard in all his years of ministry. Donnie, what does God smell like? He said, what does God smell like? I don't know. He thought a minute, and he said, you know, over in an Old Testament book in the Bible called Song of Solomon, there actually is a verse that said God is the rose of Sharon. So maybe God smells like a rose. The lady ended the interview abruptly, stood up, walked off, and Donnie was puzzled. He didn't see her again for some time, but when he did see her, she had changed. Her countenance had softened. Her spirit was different. She ran up to him and hugged him and said, "Donnie, you are never going to believe what happened to me." He said, "Tell me." She said, "I interviewed you with intent to embarrass you. And I asked you a question, what does God smell like? You said, like a rose." She said, "I went back to my apartment and it was dark and I was all alone. And I knelt down beside my bed and I said, God, if you are real, like you are to Donnie, reveal yourself to me." And she said, "Donnie, the whole room smelled like roses." And from that moment forward, the fragrance of the presence of God that filled her life changed her forever. When Donnie Moore told me that story, it just stayed in my spirit for many, many years. And then when I had the opportunity to start writing for a Phillips Craig and Dean album, I started thinking about all the stories I'd heard, and that one was quickened to my spirit, and I said, I want to write that. And so I said, who could write this with me? I found a worship leader in Nashville. His name was Michael Farron. Michael Farron had been through some difficulty. And I sat down with Michael, and I told him the story. And even in Michael's challenged state, something happened to him. He started crying. He said, hang on. He went and got a guitar, sat down there with me, started playing. In the driest and barren of places, where no other flower has grown. It was so good. And he and I just started working through that rose of Sharon, the smells, the sights. What brings to your mind and your senses when you think of a rose? How is God's fragrance in your life? We just started working on it, and we worked on it about 2 or 3 hours. And then we had something that was pretty good. And I said, man, I think the guys are going to really like this. So I pitched it to Mr. Craig and Mr. Dean. And they said, man, we like this song, but we don't think it's for this album. I didn't like to hear that. I don't like them for that. I said, what are you talking about? It's a good song. They said, it is a good song. I just don't know that we're the ones to record it. So they passed on it. Can you believe that? So I said, oh no. So I went and I got the producer of the Phillips Craig and Dean album, and I said, produce this song for me. And he did. Nathan Knuckles did such a great job on this song. Mr. Dean happened to be passing through after he had finished singing the last song on the Phillips Craig and Dean album. I said, come here, Dan. And I got him in there. I said, sing this verse. And he did. And this is the first time I've played this song on any of our podcasts. I pray it touches your life. And I pray that no matter what season of life you're in, the fragrance of the presence of Jesus Christ begins to be an aroma that gives you hope. Heaven's Rose.
In the driest and barren of places, where no other flower could grow, ever defiant, it blooms through the storm. How sweet is heaven's rose. How sweet is the rose of Sharon. Sharon, how fragrant and beautiful, petals unfolding with marvelous hope. How sweet is heaven's rose. Behold, now his radiant splendor, the aroma of life in our souls. Let melodies rise up and never grow old. How sweet is heaven's rose. How sweet is the rose of Sharon. How fragrant and beautiful, petals unfolding with marvelous hope. How sweet is heaven's rose. How sweet is the rose of Sharon. How fragrant and beautiful, petals unfolding with marvelous hope. How sweet is heaven's rose.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I pray the song touched your heart. And if it did, I encourage you to download or stream it wherever you listen to music. To find more information on this and other media resources released by Life Family Media, you can visit life.family/media. Thank you again for being with me today. It means so much to me. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to this show. We love hearing from you. If you have a question and you want to hear it answered on this podcast, send me an email, podcast@life.family. That's podcast@life.family. I'll see you next time.